Hello and welcome to episode 231 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast and the fifth episode in our series Connection and Disconnection in Remote Teams. Today's episode looks at what employers or managers can do to help connection in a remote team. So if you're just joining us for the first time, I do encourage you to listen back to the other episode in this series because Bri Kajati, who is the host of the series, has been covering all the concepts, really unpacking the issue so that now we can start to implement some specifics, so that now we can start thinking about how specifically to solve this. So if you are joining us for the first time, welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, which is a show about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and how distributed organizations are evolving. The company behind this podcast is Virtual Not Distant, and I'm its director, Pilar Orti. We haven't met before, welcome. And we exist to help managers and their teams transition to an office optional approach. And you can find everything about us over at virtualnotdistant.com. And you can also send us feedback through there. Now, this particular episode you're listening to is part of a 7-episode series created in collaboration with ShieldGEO. They are our partners, and I am delighted they took this on. ShieldGEO is a distributed company themselves, and they help organizations employ people internationally by looking after the tax, after the payroll, and, well, just simplifying the process of having an employee in a different country. And indeed, Bri Kajati is driving this series on behalf of ShieldGEO. So before we move on to her and guests, some thoughts from episode 4, which was all about who is responsible for connection and disconnection in remote teams. So we had some feedback following publishing of the episode from Isabel Collins, who's actually a guest. And she was saying, well, we had no idea how timely the series would be. And her view, belonging is a shared experience between employer and employee, so the responsibility is shared. Kerry Porritt said, so very useful for anyone adjusting to working remotely in these trying times. We will get together through this team. And I have some longer feedback from my mom, who does listen to the show. She listens to a lot of different kinds of podcasts. And I'll be translating a little bit on the fly. And she said she particularly enjoyed this episode because of the specific examples, like that the duty of a manager is to establish a setup of social conditions or let the people know the infrastructure of the company, which of course helps with connection. She's saying, actually, my mother is retired now, and she said that she was an employee of an organization for her life. And she said it made her reflect on the advantages that an employee has as opposed to a freelancer, like salary raises, training, savings, hobbies shared by other members. And she said that the freelancer needs to find all this and really be very active in finding all this, whereas for someone in an organization, it's there for them to take advantage. And really interesting also, she said that the manager has to avoid the misconception that working remote is safe because people are at home. She said even about the example about the state of Ontario, where the manager can be penalized for not looking after that aspect of the work. And she finally says that it's very clear that remote teams must have very clear rules and norms, and everyone knowing what everyone else is doing. So thank you, Mom. Thank you for that. And thank you, Bri, and guests, of course. Right, well, that is all from me. I'll be back right at the end. For now, I'll leave you with Bri Kajati.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Connection and Disconnection in Remote Teams. As always, I'm your host, Bri Kajati, and I'm taking us through this mini-series on behalf of ShieldGEO and in collaboration with Virtual Not Distant. This is episode 5, and we've already covered quite a lot in our quest to unpack this topic. We looked at some of the barriers that remote work poses to connection, the wider impacts that feeling disconnected can have, and last episode we wrestled with the concept of responsibility and who should be in charge of making connection happen. But today, we're looking at the specifics of what an employer or manager can do to encourage connection in their remote teams. And this will be a sort of flip side to our next episode where we look at this from an employee perspective, or rather what we as individuals can do to ensure we remain connected. To start us off, we're hearing from Isabel Collins, the founder of Belonging Space. She says that discovering our common values is the first step in establishing belonging or connection among a community.
I think what really defines belonging is ethos. It's our shared belief. It's what we believe in, what we value, our purpose. That's the heart of belonging. And a lot of our work is around defining what that is. So that if you know what it is that you value as an organisation and what's your purpose as an organisation, everybody's work, whatever that work is, wherever that work is, all joins up. It's all interdependent to work towards that. And you keep reinforcing that. Whatever your particular work is every day and however you do what you need to do, the why we do it and the what we believe in, that's the same.
We know that values are important in how we establish culture, how we treat our clients or customers, and the kinds of messaging we use both internally and externally. So it makes sense then that it also has an impact on how connected our teams feel. Courtney Sader, the Director of People and Culture at Buffer, shares how they've been extremely intentional about defining this internal value system since their inception as a company.
We've been in business about 10 years, and we've been very intentional with our culture throughout almost all of that time, almost from the very beginning. We've tried to be very specific and explicit about the values that guide us. And those are always kind of in evolution, but they do tend to have some common themes that stay core or have stayed core across the lifetime of the company so far. And those are things like default to transparency, show gratitude, improve consistently, practice reflection. So very intentional kind of sets of actions that tend to unify our team. Like we have so much diversity in terms of all the different demographic elements that make our team who they are, but we are pretty united around these specific values, which makes it a unique and, to me, very wonderful place to work.
Now, something that I've heard from quite a few of our guests, and I think we've even mentioned it in previous episodes already, is the importance of acknowledging this as a potential issue as early as possible. The more we talk about things, the more familiar they are, and the more safe employees will feel to bring things up. ShieldGEO's co-founder Tim Burgess does this by sharing his own experiences.
Yeah, so I think the thing that probably has the greatest impact is acknowledging it as a potential issue and being able to talk about it. So for me, that means modeling that behavior. So it's something that I always talk to people about is my own personal experience and how we're conscious that this might happen. And we want people to know that it's okay if it happens. It's okay to talk about it and that we want to try and help.
Author of Working Remotely, Teresa Douglas, suggests that this could be formalised in a similar way to how companies currently provide resources on physical health, including benefits like gym memberships or discounts, health insurance or policies.
It should be, and I use that word deliberately, a part of a remote company's toolkit or a company that has remote workers to have, just as you would have a health insurance page, here's your resource if you need to see a therapist, here's your resource if the company has discounts for a gym or whatever. Here are your resources if you're starting as a remote worker to consider these issues about loneliness, isolation. Even a page that says maybe you need a hobby. Here are some resources to think about is good. On a more human level, managers of remote workers should be connecting with their employees and providing space so that if somebody is struggling, they can feel safe enough to say, I'm not as connected to my team as I'd like to be. Even if that comes out in surveys or however a company chooses to do that, it's important to make an effort to see where people are and if they're struggling.
If the possibility of disconnection and feelings of isolation are regularly expressed at various levels of communication within a company, it creates a culture of openness within the whole team. This means it's more likely that employees will bring this up if and when it becomes an issue for them. Marcus Vermuth, an engineering manager at Buffer, shares how setting up this kind of culture from the beginning makes it less likely that people will fall through the cracks.
First and foremost, like the honesty and the openness that is in a team is cultural related. So first, the team culture, the company culture, is it already in transparent and open culture? Will people bring things up just on their own? Like is your level of trust that far? Which for some, I would say that is. So people will bring that up, even if I ask. If the person brings up, it's easy, right? If they already bring it up to you in a one-on-one, I wouldn't say it's easy in a sense, but then you already have something to play with. If you ask and they bring it up, it's also great, but then you have to remind yourself that you have to ask all the time, which gets tricky because you're busy and you lose track of things. With remote work, a lot is results orientated. So you might not notice something only until it happens in their work or in their productivity. So you will notice someone be less productive, but then it's already maybe not too late, but it's already further down the line where something already happened. So that's something to be aware of with remote work, because that can happen pretty easily, that you see someone lose productivity, but it's already, past the whole thing. So that whole results orientation is great, but also tricky when it comes to those kind of issues.
But how do we actually set up this kind of culture when we aren't sitting next to people every day? Laurel Farah, the founder of Distribute Consulting, says we do it creatively.
In the business world for the past decade, it's really come to the forefront of trendy topics of how important culture is. And so every business is really creating a strong culture and focused on that employee experience. As well they should be. We've seen incredible results from that. So that's a big fear for managers, is how do I translate that culture into a virtual environment? And it's just the same as communication and productivity tracking, right? That it's not a big change, but it is an intentional one. So we're not going to be bumping into somebody in the break room like we previously were. So how can we get that same experience and same result, but in a virtual environment? And so that's where we see companies thinking more creatively about how to use Slack. And that's why we see more casual Slack channels, or the use of GIFs, or we see people throwing virtual parties or sending gifts, mailing gifts to them once a month or something like that. Like, there's a lot of ways that you can engage people and let them know that you remember them, that you care about them as an individual, that you can celebrate the unique personality of your company, but just you don't have to be in a break room to do it. So it's a great opportunity for managers to be more creative in how they engage with their individual workers.
Coming at this problem creatively means that we're not just trying to recreate office environments, because by doing so we'd be ignoring the unique merits that remote work offers in the first place. Psychologist Julianne Holt-Lundstad argues that innovative solutions are a way to mitigate the issues associated with remote work, while at the same time capitalizing on the benefits.
One of the things that we need to really think about is remote work has a lot of advantages. Certainly there are environmental advantages, not having to commute across town and be on the roads. And so there are ways in which remote work can help facilitate social connection. And there are ways in which remote work can be isolating, right? Remote work can give us the flexibility to potentially spend more time with friends and family, but we may be more removed from other coworkers and potentially, not always, but less contact with those that we may work with. And so if we can really be thoughtful about where the strengths lie and where the potential limitations lie, we can start thinking of more novel, creative solutions to maximize those strengths and help begin to minimize some of those limitations.
For remote companies, this might mean making specific rules around the frequency and method of communication, something we mentioned in the last episode. But Isabel argues that this should extend to include social communication too.
Making sure that there is a ritualistic point of contact and that is not undermined, that's not seen as cost, that is seen as critical. I would say building all of that in would be very important. having the point of contact as well that is simply for somebody to sort of offload. If you're working a lot on your own, you can sort of build up, quite a lot of guff that isn't being let out in that little bit of conversation around the kitchen as you make your coffee or your tea, or I don't know, up and down in the lift in the morning.
At Shield, we actually have a Slack channel called Grumbling where we can post complaints about anything without judgment. It sort of aims to replicate that quick minute or two of offloading that you might have with a colleague after being stuck in traffic or having a difficult phone call with a client. Laurel says that these structured rules around how we communicate not only protect us from becoming disconnected, but can actually act as a marker for managers to recognize when someone in their team may be struggling.
I make sure that we have a very clear structure of engagement for a lot of reasons. Number one, to prevent isolation. So these protocols can be like standing appointments of like stand-up calls once a week, or it can be that we set the expectation that you are active on Slack for 3 to 4 hours a day, or you attend these meetings and there's the expectation articulated that you are engaged and vocal during the meetings, or whatever. We set what the protocols are for engagement so that we can prevent isolation, and hopefully they will always feel connected if they are participating in this checklist of engagement. However, it also, as a manager, gives me a baseline that if somebody is not participating at that level, something might be wrong. And so that gives me the prompt to say, hey, you were really quiet during the stand-up meeting. Is there something going on? Or, hey, I haven't seen your assignments coming through on time, or you've been unusually late on the delivery of your results. Is everything okay, right? To set a very clear expectation of what engagement looks like as a remote worker so that you can use that as a standard of measurement. And that's kind of part of virtual body language, is to really learn how to identify new nonverbal communication and to understand what that means when they act in a certain way.
Teresa sees these ritualized check-ins as real opportunities for growth. It's not only a stopgap solution, but something that encourages personal and professional development, which is something that she loves to see in her team.
You've been working remotely for this amount of time. Are you feeling settled in this? Here are some questions to think about for your own self. You don't have to share the answers with me, but I would encourage you to think about these things and share what you'd like about where you feel you are and what you need. Because we need to teach people the questions to ask themselves. And if we can do that, then that they can monitor themselves. Just hearing somebody say, okay, I was driving home from teaching this and I was thinking about this and that and this, and I'm just sitting there not reacting with my face, but thinking, he's grown up. All right, you're there. I've taught you to fish.
But not every manager is super intuitive, even face-to-face. And as we've realized in previous episodes, not every employee is able to recognize when they're feeling low as well. This is where technology and processes can actually help. Brian Rhee is in the process of creating an app called Headlamp. It aims to help teams monitor feelings of loneliness and isolation by asking regular, repetitive questions.
At the moment, Headlamp is very, very early on. And the first thing that I want to try to do with software is to start with simply monitoring the feelings of loneliness and isolation among members of a remote team. And so currently it is a very rudimentary approach that checks in with employees on a daily or weekly or bi-weekly basis, depending upon your settings, and asks employees across, with this Slack bot, just a short, like 5 to 7 questions of, how are you feeling this week? Red, orange, or green? And that's a model and approach that I've picked up from Jerry Colonna, who does, executive coaching and mindset coaching. And it's just a very simple way to to get at that, those initial feelings. Can a tool monitor regularly those characteristics and then make suggestions and recommendations to not only the employee but their manager, to at least bring some awareness to the problem and offer some potential solutions and best practices? I think so. So that's what it does at the moment. Long term, or not even that long term, like just with my product engineering brain on right now. I actually think that a very important piece of this whole puzzle is not to measure it after it's a problem, but to head it off at the pass with, a fantastic and well thought through onboarding process.
But while this solution obviously relies on technology, Brian is adamant it's not meant to replace human connection. Just
from a product philosophy, its best work is going to be putting people in touch with one another who are most suited to help one another.
Regardless of how you intend to reach out to your team, Teresa makes the point that as the person in a position of authority, managers have to make that first move.
The first thing that I do is try to bring my humanity into my role with my direct reports. I just had a bit of a change and inherited some people from a different part of the company. And in the first email I sent a picture of me with my kids. And I talked about what I do outside of work and the fact that I play guitar badly and that I run and that I'm happy to meet with people, crack little jokes. It's bringing in the humanity. And right away, I had a couple responses. Oh, I do that thing too. Or, oh, my kids are that age. And immediately connecting with somebody because I've provided excuses for them to talk to me. And as managers, we have to do that. It's such a power relationship. My direct reports get paid if they do a good job. And I'm one of the people that decides if they're doing a good job. So if they get the feeling that I'm in their corner, that I'm a basically friendly presence, it's easier when I start connecting with them for them to open up, and then we have that relationship. As management, since we're in that power position, we have to offer the first vulnerability.
So far, we've been talking about the basics of establishing a remote work policy, defining your values, establishing a culture of open communication, formalizing those communication practices, and outlining expectations around roles. I think the only other thing I'd add here, which is something that we've covered before, is open access to information, which not only helps employees actually do their jobs remotely, but also provides space for that visible teamwork. These, I think, form the foundation of what you're trying to achieve in a remote company, but the methods of implementation will obviously change and should be catered to as team-specific needs. Courtney shares some of the initiatives that Buffer implement, which might help you to develop some ideas.
We do a video gathering every month. Those can be around serious topics or kind of silly, fun topics. Folks are just invited to come in for as long as they have. Could be like 5 minutes, could be 30 minutes, just to see faces you haven't seen in a while, just to get a little bit of social time. So those are fun. We're on Slack. Slack is kind of like our online water cooler. So we use a tool called Donut that helps pair teammates up. So if you're in the pairs room, every week you'll get a new pairing and you'll be sort of nudged to reach out to the person you're paired with, set up, a 20, 30-minute chat, just like a hi, how are you? What's going on in your world? What are you working on? It's a nice way to stay in touch with people that maybe you haven't talked to in a while. Similarly, but a little deeper, we have what we call our mastermind program. You're matched up with someone outside of your particular area of work, but similar spot on your sort of career paths together. And you meet with that person once a week or once every 2 weeks. Kind of depends on your schedule. And that person is kind of like your rock within Buffer. If the relationship works really well, which often they do, that's someone who you can go to with your achievements and successes and your anxieties and fears and your workplace issues issues and maybe even your personal, challenges, and just have someone to share that with, not necessarily solve the problems. It's not meant to be sort of a therapist relationship, but just someone to listen, someone who can kind of understand and empathize and see you all the way through that journey. So those relationships tend to be really powerful. We'll pay for folks to go work from a co-working space, because sometimes it's really important to put on pants, go get dressed, go out into the world. So that's great. If you prefer working from a coffee shop or cafe, we will, reimburse your coffee, your croissant, what have you. So you can go to a coffee shop and do work there, kind of be out in the world amongst people, which is nice. And we also work with a tool called Modern Health that is specifically for sort of digital online coaching around many different topics. So it's everything from, you can do a quick meditation, 5 or 10 minutes there, to you can meet weekly with a coach and talk about challenges, talk about what's going on in your world. So we really want to provide support at a lot of different levels for teammates. So some folks may be really fine to be on their own for, a couple of days of the week, but we really want to have options. So if you ever do feel like, I've been pretty isolated for a while and I wish there was something that I could join or someplace that I could be, we never want folks to have to kind of flail around and look for those. We really want them to be very visible, very available right at that moment.
Even in a company that is so well established and so intentional around creating a positive and open culture, people can still struggle with feelings of isolation and loneliness. These solutions aim to reduce the likelihood, but they're also there to catch people when disconnection occurs.
We try not to overreact. It's cyclical. And I've felt, moments of isolation within my own career at Buffer across the 6 years that I've worked remotely. So we try not to freak out. It's just something that happens. We often will do what we call the traffic light exercise at the start of any meeting, where you basically say, if you're feeling green, yellow, or red. Green obviously being, everything's good. Yellow meaning kind of in a danger zone, maybe a little tired, maybe a little stressed. And red being things are not in a great spot. And when we first started doing it, everyone was just green all the time. Green, green, green. We were like, maybe people aren't feeling able to tell us that they're feeling anything other than great. So we really kind of had to dig in a little bit and say any response to this is okay. It's really going to be useful for us to hear. So now we do hear, some yellows and some reds, and it can mean stress, and it can also mean isolation. And sometimes it does mean that. So we point them to our existing resources, because sometimes, it's a busy company and they may not be aware of some of the stuff that's available to them. And then every case is different. So there's always more we can do. If it is an engineer who is feeling isolated, maybe we partner them with someone so they can do some pair programming every day. Or maybe we can work with them to find some local organizations or meetups so they can go out in their city, wherever they might be in the world, and find some like-minded folks who have similar challenges. Often it is time zone specific. So we have our most limited number of teammates in the kind of Asia Pacific area. So when a few of them express feelings of it's really quiet where we are, it's really hard to feel connected to the rest of the team, we tried a lot of different things to kind of bring that section of the team more into the fold, going more asynchronous with a lot of our communication, so that, it's hard to wake up and feel like you missed all the conversations and all the decisions have already been made. So we did kind of move some more communication into an asynchronous format, slowed it down a little bit so folks could feel rightly like they were part of the process, as they absolutely should be. So it really just depends on what the situation is, where the isolation is coming from. But I think it's pretty safe to say we'll always try and go find whatever solution exists, work with the teammate to see what we can do there. It's really important to kind of go that extra mile to see if we can make that change.
And even though Buffer's already implemented so many initiatives, they're always open to trying new things too.
Yeah, we're always kind of on the lookout for new tools, new experiences, new things we could try. In January, we did a virtual forest bathing exercise. I think it's the first one that's ever been done online. So we had a forest bather come in and kind of talk us through, like, how to observe nature in a contemplative way. That was really cool. Yeah, we're just always like kind of looking for like, what else can we do? Like, what more can we do? It's really fun.
If this is overwhelming, remember that there's no need to try and implement all of these specifics. It's all about the experience for your team, not the methods in which you get there. Tim shares an interesting way to think about this.
The way I've started to think about these things is that we have principles, and then below that we have guidelines, and then below that we have rules. And rules you could probably tie into processes in this example. So the idea is that we have an overall principle of what we're trying to achieve, and then that might translate into guidelines or, not hard and fast lines, but general directions we're trying to move in. And then over time, that might even coalesce into rules. So one example would be that if our principle is we want people to be able to feel connected, the guideline might be that if we're having a meeting that involves co-located and non-co-located people, we want to try and treat everyone equally. And then the rule might be that everyone has to join from their own computer so that everyone's equal. You've all got your little square on the screen. We don't have a ton of rules about this because it's such a personal and situational issue that I think it's better to have sort of the principles, which are we're trying to give people a wide range of ways to feel connected. And our guidelines then are that let's have a bunch of different things that we can offer and try. But if we start enforcing those as rules, I tried at one point to make everybody get on one of those water coolers, whether it was daily or weekly, and it didn't stick in a couple of locations. They didn't want to do it. And there's no point trying to force that because then it could actually end up being a negative thing. What we're trying to do is give people a space to feel connected. If they don't need that, or if that is not a way that resonates with them in order to connect, then we could actually have the opposite effect. Hopefully, people are able to find ways of connecting and expressing themselves and feeling a part of the greater organization in a way that's authentic and real to them.
By embracing flexibility here, it gives us more space for trial and error, as well as change. Julianne argues that evaluating the effectiveness of solutions is a major part of developing policy.
I think one of the key things that we need to do is really, as we come up with potential solutions, that we evaluate the effectiveness. And so, for instance, when office work went to the trend of having cubicles everywhere, there were some potential negative effects of that. And so we need to really think about, when we come up with various solutions, what are the effects of this? And this includes multiple aspects, right? Because we want people to be productive in their work, but we don't want that to come at a cost.
Workplace psychologist Richard McKinnon agrees, adding that employers should be wary of fads and trends and instead focus on the genuine needs of their teams.
Fads, fashions, new stuff, or someone comes back from a conference and just, it's like, I've seen the Messiah, we need to do it differently. And it can be really disruptive. Something I see happen in the workplace a lot is managers saying, let's get the team together, let's do something special. And they bring everyone down the pub. And that doesn't suit everyone. Not everyone drinks alcohol, but not everyone likes to be with everyone at the same time. And they might really value some one-on-one time with someone. And maybe they can't go after working hours to do that kind of stuff. So again, making sure it happens within working hours. I mean, they might have caring responsibilities. They have a train they need to catch, or, hey, you're not paying me for this. So why should I give up my evening? I've got a Spanish class I want to get to. So being inclusive in how you do these kinds of things and flexible. Not everyone is like you. And so what works for you is not necessarily going to work for the people on your team. Experiment, try things out. I mean, wow, ask people. Ask people what they would like and build that into the team's way of working. It's about being sensitive to the context. What's going on now? What do people need? What do they want? What shall we try? We're talking about the complexity of human relationships here. There's no kind of engineering decision tree for it. If there were, maybe there'd be no conflicts in the world. But it's trial and error, and it's considering who these people are, what their jobs are, where are they, and what are we open to trying? And hey, is there a problem to begin with? A lot of the things I see in the workplace, managers and HR leaders are introducing new things because they're new, not because they're needed or they're even going to have a positive impact in the workplace.
Well, I'm obviously an advocate for experimentation and creating policy that is specific to your team. This shouldn't come at the cost of making your team struggle through idea after idea. And sometimes that means seeking help.
What it boils down to in remote work, especially when we're talking about full distribution or 100% remote workers and moving away from the hybridization of teams and more towards the full distribution of teams, this is new territory. This has not really been done in the business world before. So there's a lot of learning that needs to be done and a lot of trial and a lot of error too. And that's why we see the retraction of policies, is because frankly, you don't know what you don't know. And so when you are looking to make this change, you think, well, I'm doing the best that I can and I hope that it's good enough, but you may not think to have a casual Slack channel to replace water cooler chat. If somebody thinks of that, great, but if not, maybe you're going to be in trouble down the line. That's why it's so essential to work with a consultant and experts that have been down this road before and have conducted comprehensive research about the organizational development of remote teams. Is exactly for that reason, is because we do know what you don't know. And so we can help you prevent pitfalls before they happen. This is the classic cases of IBM and Yahoo that had to retract their policies, and it made international news and it was a big deal. That's exactly why we exist as advocates, is to help your organization prevent that from happening, because Yahoo never thought that was going to happen to them. They just didn't know what they didn't know.
Because the beauty of implementing something that works is that it means you'll have a well-functioning, happy, and healthy remote team.
What we see in very, very intentional companies and creative people operation infrastructures is that people are starting to think about their location as irrelevant as much as the company is thinking about their location being irrelevant. So if they feel engaged in a very saturated employee experience, the workplace has been extended beyond the office. So we're seeing people invited into a virtual workspace, and there's consistent engagement practices. Then people don't notice that they're not in the office. They're engaged in their work. They're communicating with their teammates. They're producing great results, and they don't notice that they are not surrounded by people because they feel that they're surrounded by people.
I think what we can gather from this episode is that while remote workers are potentially more susceptible to going through periods of isolation, it by no means has to be our final form. There are definitely solutions that we can implement as employers or managers to help mitigate this potential issue of disconnection. Now, as with everything, the specific processes will look different company to company, but as Tim mentioned, there are likely to be some common principles or guidelines that you can draw from when developing your own strategies. Whether that be ritualized points of contact, as Isabel suggested, through apps like Headlamp or social Slack channels, or bringing awareness to the issue by including online resources, as Teresa mentioned, or sharing your own experiences like Tim. Whatever you intend to try out, make sure it fits in with your company culture and value system. And as both Richard and Julianne insisted, make sure you actually evaluate its effectiveness. Just because it worked for Buffer doesn't mean it will work for you. Ask your employees, make note of how many people are making use of the resource, and adjust accordingly. Overall, we hope you feel empowered by this notion that while this is extremely common, it's not debilitating, and there are so many opportunities to overcome this issue. Please reach out to us and let us know if your company has an interesting way of keeping everyone connected. Or if you do decide to try something from this episode, we'd love to hear from you. For now, this is the end of our episode, and we really hope that you enjoyed it. As always, a huge thank you to all of our guests who have provided such thoughtful responses throughout this whole series, and in particular for sharing their personal experiences in this episode. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Make sure you catch our next episode where we'll be covering solutions from an employee perspective. It's been so great to have you. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Talk soon.
Thank you, Bree, for the episode and spot-on summary and last words which totally resonate here at Virtual Not Distant. Listeners, I really am extremely grateful to ShieldGEO for taking on this mammoth project, and I hope that you're enjoying it too. Do get in touch to share your own reflections and examples through virtualnotdistant.com or email pilar@virtualnotdistant.com and let us know your thoughts on this huge topic of connection and disconnection in remote teams.